It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm very excited to talk today with my guest, Joe Gustafson, founder and CEO of Brainshark. Joe, how are you doing?
Great, Andy.
So, Joe, if you could just take a minute and introduce yourself to the audience, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm the founder and CEO of Brainshark. We started Brainshark about 15 years ago, and it kind of came out of an idea I had, in a prior business and a prior life. I'm not sure how far you want me to go back,
Oh,
Andy. I can
to
go
the
all the way.
beginning, to the beginning.
All right, good.
How'd
Okay.
you get started in sales?
Well, it was my first job out of school. So this is going way back in the time machine to 1980, and a lot of interesting things were going on. You had the mini computer world, and you had
Mm-hmm.
PCs coming on, and I went to a school outside of Boston here called Babson College, which is pretty well known for turning out entrepreneurs. And my first job was a salesman for a company called Service Bureau Company, which was formed by IBM, which was when you think back on it, we're in the middle of all this software as a service and subscription economy,
Right,
and that's really what they did back. When if you couldn't afford a mainframe, they would sell you computer time and computer services. So anyway, my first
right.
job was a salesman, and learned a lot, got trained a lot. In the old-fashioned way, where they'd send you to New York or Atlanta, and you'd be there for weeks at a time, and you'd go back every year for weeks at a time.
Oh, yeah, I remember
And
those days.
yeah, navy suits and white shirts and rep ties. And
Absolutely.
so I stayed there for about 4 or 5 years, and that was very successful. But I always wanted to get into a small business, so I joined a tech company here in Boston in '85 that built relational databases on a PC, and it was a great experience. The company failed after 2.5 years, but it gave me an opportunity to go out and start my own business, and I think it was '87, and we built computer-based training for SQL databases and
Wow.
DB2 and Oracle,
Right.
and it was a self-funded business, and we uh, partnered up with Oracle, which was a great experience, and I ended up selling that company to Gartner Group in '95. So that's how we got there, and the reason I started Brainshark was the experiences we had at that prior company, Relational Courseware, where we used to build computer-based training, and it would take 15 different skill sets of people, and it would take 3 months and $50,000 to build one course. And what we did was it wasn't scalable. So the idea for Brainshark came around from the problems we had at trying to build lots of courseware and curriculum at Relational Courseware. So the idea from Brainshark came from a problem we had at a prior business.
So, tell the audience what Brainshark does for those that might not be familiar with it, because you've really sort of expanded beyond just training. I mean, people are using it for marketing and sales and so on.
Yeah, it's a great question. We've really kind of, it's like a tale of two companies. We started Brainshark to solve that problem I had, where could you quickly and easily and at low cost create rich on-demand content. And this was back in 2000 when we started the company. And it was kind of a novel idea that, why should you spend $50,000 on computer-based training when everyone's got a PC, and the internet was really starting to work actually. And you had people that had their expertise and their knowledge. So what we did is we built this true SaaS platform, and nobody knew what SaaS was back then.
Right.
But what it allowed you to do was to take your content, which is primarily PowerPoint, upload it up into the internet, and again, it wasn't even called a cloud or anything back then,
Right.
and just pick up a telephone and record your voice to the slides, and you could have interactions and polls and surveys and quizzes, and people could get access to that rich content anytime. And the value of that was that had a higher retention value. It would be more interesting. You could look at it anytime that you wanted to. And we found some pretty interesting markets for it where, yes, learning and training, but also companies were using it for marketing. And, they were educating their prospects and their customers before having sales conversations with them. So it was really and it still is the bulk of our sales today. We're a 250 person company. We're, greater than $50 million in recurring revenue. And we, built up the leadership position in that on-demand, rich content. And we've got about 3,000 enterprise customers. So we really pioneered a whole market around that business, which allowed us to then launch into something new and really exciting around sales productivity.
Right. And so you guys use the stat in your material that only 11% of sales conversations are considered of value by the executives who are on the receiving end of it. So what research did that come from, and what's really the cause of that?
Yeah, good question. So that I believe that came from Forrester, and where they found that 1 out of 10 or 9 out. It depends on how you look at it, right? But 9 out of 10
Right.
sales conversations are a waste of time. Um, so we we saw that stat, and we started to realize that, boy, the world has changed a lot on how we buy and how we sell. And I think you touched on this in your book Zero Time Selling also, where prospects and customers are much more educated than they've ever been before. And that puts enormous stress and pressure on salespeople to deliver that high value add, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the reason we think they're not successful is that salespeople are probably selling the old fashioned way where they want to talk about features and product type things. And yet the customer or the prospect is saying, well, wait a minute, I already did that research. So tell me things I don't know. Give me some added value. So
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a big lack of value in the conversation today.
And so, how does Brainshark help that? Because if you've read the book, and I strong believer in the value of maximizing the time and that you use and invest in the sales process, but also maximize the customer's return on the time they invest in you. So how are people using Brainshark to help shorten that buyer's journey?
Yeah. So we did a lot of research into this before launching our next set of products, which is called the Brainshark Sales Accelerator, which has been in the market for about 9 months. But what we wanted to understand the questions that you're asking, right, is like, what's the problem? Why is there a sales productivity gap? What's causing it? And what can we do about it to solve it? And between our conversations with our customers, with new customers, we talked to a lot of analysts, we talked to industry experts like yourself, and we found it came down to a few basic problems out there. One is that um, in in order to have a higher value conversation, you have to be more educated, right? As a salesperson, you have to be not just knowledgeable on your products, but you also need to be knowledgeable on your industry, what's going on, how do other customers use your product. So the learning is a really important part of it. We can dive into these things if you want. But so one is learning.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing we found was that when customers are talking to salespeople, they're not having very engaging conversations. It's almost the show up and throw up kind of thing. And maybe I'm simplifying it a bit, but they truly weren't having that conversation that people
Right.
wanted.
So it's just the salespeople talking
Yeah, for
primarily,
the
and
most part.
right.
Yeah, let me tell you about my great product and it's really awesome and let me show you and let me give you a demo, that kind of
Right.
thing. Whereas customers are like, well, wait a minute, I mean, how is this going to impact my objective, which might be a shorter sales cycle or larger deals or cross-selling or whatever. So the engagement was number two. The third thing that we identified as issues were around coaching, and that is that I think frontline managers have an enormous role to play in sales productivity, and I don't think there's a lot of good help that's being given. I know back at my time, back at the service bureau IBM days, they would promote the best salesperson to manager, and then they'd move them around the country to some branch. And it
Right.
doesn't mean if you're a good salesman, it doesn't mean you're going to be a great manager, right? And
Exactly.
they don't necessarily provide a lot of training for it. The fourth thing that we've seen is that there is zero visibility into what salespeople do. And I think that's really fascinating. And I think this is actually going to be the future of sales, is that today with the internet, prospects and customers, are doing all their research ahead of time. And when they go to a company's website, they're looking at information, they're downloading it, and all that is being tracked by a marketing automation system like Eloqua or Marketo
Right.
or HubSpot or anything like that. So marketers have fascinating information, huge amounts of data, and they can track and predict and move things along. But as soon as it gets to a sales rep, it goes into a black hole because the sales guy is just, get out of the way. I'm going to go talk to the customer and I know what I'm doing. And very little information gets put into the CRM system. So
Well, and the
managers,
information that gets put in is all quantitative. It's not qualitative, right? So you know how many calls or how many touches somebody made, but you really don't know the quality or the impact of that.
well, it's interesting you say that. So you could say it's quantitative, but there's a very small amount of quantitative, which is um, I moved it from stage one to stage two, or we opened an opportunity and we closed an opportunity. I don't think there's a lot of quantitative information. In fact, I do think that even the qualitative information that's in there is it's all subjective, right? It's
Yes,
like,
well, that's the point I was making. You're right. Excuse me.
yeah, so it's like once a week you sit down with your boss, your manager, and Joe, how's this deal going? Well, it's going great, boss. I mean, they love us, and why? Why? And it's going to close by the end of the month. Well, why? Well, because I said so,
Right.
and there's nothing to really back it up. So I think we're saying the same thing, that
Right.
there's a lack of really good data into the CRM system, and it's because salespeople aren't wired to put a lot of that information in. So we need to find ways to track the activities and the things that are going on. And I think a great way to do that is through content. And then the last piece of it is that we're constantly hearing across the board is that companies, they're not getting the value out of a CRM system that they want, and that is because the reps aren't using it. And companies want to use CRM for more strategic platforms that they can do lots of interesting and cool things with that'll impact their customers.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but they can't if nobody is really using it. So those are the five key things that we saw. And what we wanted to do to answer your original question was, what are we doing about it? Well, we built a whole set of products called the Brainshark Sales Accelerator that allows, first of all, it's all tightly integrated into Salesforce.com. So it all works from within the CRM, which is what everybody wants. It will provide onboarding, learning, and information that you can get from a number of different places in the CRM, from your homepage, from Chatter, from a number of different places. It will provide the right information to salespeople as they need it. One of the
Mm-hmm.
interesting stats we found too is that salespeople spend 40% of their time, or 2 days of the week, looking for or creating content. And it's a huge sinkhole of time. So what
Right.
we do is we recommend the right amount of information at the stage of sale, who you're talking to, the altitude level, the products that they're interested in, a variety of different variables, and it's all right there in Salesforce. So the sales rep, instead of looking for stuff, the content finds the sales rep. And then the last piece of this, what we do is we also recommend content that you should share with your customers. So before going to a meeting, maybe 2 days in advance, I'll send you out a Brainshark video presentation, and you can look at that, and I'll know if you looked at it. I'll know if
Mm-hmm.
you shared it with other people. Then when we get there to the meeting, I can, instead of just plugging in my PC and shining it up against the wall, I can perhaps use my iPad, where I can beam content across the table to you, or people that are calling in on the telephone across the country to them, to their PC or their iPad, and we can share content. And then I can follow up as well. And what's great about it is all of that information, that content that we're using either before or during or after the meeting, is all tracked.
Right.
So we know specifically what you're looking at, who's in the meeting, who's looking at it, how they're responding, what order of things. So now you can start to do a number of things. One is the salesperson has a record of what we talked about. The manager can look at it and say, well, Joe, you're telling me this thing's going to close, but you're using stage two content. You're not even close to,
Right.
where you should be. Nobody's asking for references or anything yet.
Right.
And then management, think about this from a senior level perspective, and I've heard this from some very big companies, is that we might invest 10 or 50 million dollars introducing a new product, and we're telling Wall Street, the CEOs on the quarterly calls telling Wall Street that yeah, this thing's going great and we're really excited about it, but of their 5,000 salespeople, nobody might be talking about it, and they don't know that, right? Like, uh-oh. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit here that we're seeing in the marketplace that companies really want to solve around sales productivity.
Well, great. We're going to take a short break. This has been Joe Gustafson, CEO, founder of Brainshark, telling us about Brainshark and how it's being used to help accelerate the buyer's journey. And we'll be back right after the break. Hi, this is Andy. Connect and Sell is used by sales reps at nearly 1,000 companies, including hundreds of technology startups and several Fortune 500 companies, to overcome the challenges of getting prospects on the phone. Companies using Connect and Sell grow their revenues faster by enabling their sales reps to have more sales conversations in 90 minutes than they could otherwise achieve in an entire week. Connect and Sell can be deployed directly to your sales reps, or you can take advantage of their outbound on-demand service, which delivers qualified prospect meetings scheduled directly on your sales reps' calendars. Visit connectandsell.com to learn more about how Connect and Sell can start filling your pipeline today. We're back. Welcome back. My guest today is Joe Gustafson, founder and CEO of Brainshark. So you were just telling us before the break about how enterprises were using Brainshark to sort of, you talk about new product introduction example with the CEO of Wall Street, but can you give us sort of a typical profile of a company that uses Brainshark?
Oh, that's a tough one, because we've got customers in 36 different verticals. We've got companies that are very large, very small. We've got companies that use it around the world. Most of our buying centers are typically in North America right now, and that's kind of by choice on our side. And I think what it does is it points to the broad-based need for better sales communication, better sales training, and better sales productivity. So,
well, maybe I'll ask the question a little bit differently. Is how would someone recognize they have the need for Brainshark? If you're a sales manager, it's like, what's gonna be the thing that comes to mind and said, "Gosh, I need to find a solution to this."
Yeah, I think that's a good question. That's a really good question. I think the core is that our sales guys aren't making the number. That that we've got a real sales issue, sales problem. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that we use that Forrester stat of only 1 out of 10 sales conversations are useful and successful. I think that when we dig deep into that, the problems that we see happening out there that cause companies to go look for for solutions are, they're not making their numbers. They've got very few A reps that are beating the number, and their B's and C's are nowhere near quota. I think in your book you mentioned something like, what, 50% of salespeople don't make quota. Did I get that right?
No, that's right. Yeah.
So that's an issue. When I talk to executives and CEOs, they tell me, they want their sales cycles to be shorter. Cross-selling of new products is a big issue where companies want to expand by buying companies or buying or introducing new products, and they assume that they can just hand it into their sales organization and put it in the bag, and salespeople are going to automatically sell it. Well, that's not true. Salespeople sell what they're comfortable with, and the new products don't get uptake. So, it's a great question you just asked, is what causes people to come talk to us about improving their productivity. It depends on their situation, and it really comes down to about, I don't know, half a dozen different big bucket things that they're trying to solve. But it's all because they're not getting the right productivity out of their organization, and it's a big problem.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe just to drill deeper a little bit on that, it's just that, gosh, there's been this explosion, right, in the last 3 years. You are a pioneer in the whole sort of sales enablement space and so on, but that's in the last 2, 3 years, it's been, like I said, a real veritable explosion. A number of companies that are providing products and services in this space. That's why I started wondering, given all the various offerings that are out there, why Brainshark, right? Somebody's going to focus on Brainshark. What's that differentiating need they have that will drive them your direction?
Yeah, that's another good question. I think it's interesting. You're right. There's been in the last few years an explosion of investment and new companies looking at addressing and solving this problem, and that's a good, healthy thing, right? That's how a market is formed. Typically, in my experience, what happens with a market is that you start to understand what where the problems exist and what the use cases are for solving that. And earlier in the conversation, I mentioned the things that we're seeing out there for for problems and challenges. One is around learning, whether it's onboarding or continuous. Second is around having a more engaging conversation. Third is around coaching.
Right.
And then you've got this analytics issue. And so why companies come to us is, I mean, our heritage has been in creating great, rich content for learning, not just for, across the board corporate learning, but a lot of sales training and learning and channels. So we're experts in that. We leveraged our core capability to build an engagement platform where you can have that content served up in context. So now a salesperson can save time and they have the right information, not only to get smart before going into a call, but then also be able to share that information.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third is that we've got very deep analytics, and that is that we can track all this and we can provide insight into what's going on. Is your sales organization ready? Are your customers, consuming the right information for where they should be? And you can also measure now how what's working, right? So if we use this content here, and it causes the sales cycle to move to the next stage, and 82% of my 1,000 sales conversations that happened last week, that tells you really valuable information. So it's those three reasons that people come to us and choose Brainshark.
Well, let me change direction just a little bit and pose a hypothetical scenario to you. Excuse me. And, in this case, in the scenario, you're a brand new sales manager hired into an existing company whose sales have sort of stagnated, a little bit stalled. The company's in a hurry to get things turned around. What are the two things you would do in that first week that you're on the job that would have the biggest impact?
Well, I think the first thing I do is try and find out what the issue is. I mean, why are things stagnating? Is it is it a product issue? Is it a people issue? Is it process? Is it competitive types of situation? And then I think the next thing I would do is to take what that core problem is and start to really dissect it, and then say, okay, what can we do to uh, make an impact on and breaking through it. And in some cases, it might be some simple things, and others it might be a more complex, situation. But I think you just have to understand what the issues are, and then break it apart, and I think also get into the. I also like to get into the low hanging fruit things first, right?
Right.
Let's solve some problems that are easy, get some quick hits, show some momentum, and kind of get everybody on board, like we can tackle this thing.
So, what's the biggest challenge that you're facing at Brainshark in terms of building a high velocity sales team?
Yeah, that's also another good question. So, if you look at our core classic business, we have we created that business, and it's a tool to help you create richer content that's got a lot of value to a lot of customers. As we're getting into the sales enablement, sales productivity, sales acceleration, what we're finding is that it is a much higher level problem. It goes all the way to the chief revenue officer, C-suite, um, and these are the people that are really feeling the pain for sales productivity. So it's a selling to a different audience. It's selling to a team of people as opposed to one or two people might buy the classic Brainshark. Now we're looking at teams of people on the buyer side, which means we have to respond with a team of people here on selling. Team is
Mm-hmm.
a selling is a team sport, and
Right.
so it changes the dynamics. The opportunities are much greater, uh, and in terms of dollar value. And the other thing is that uh, it adds more value to the customer. So, they're going to be looking at this for a longer term type of a relationship. So it's a different way of selling. And we continue to have great success with our core products, but a challenge for us is how do we go to market in a different way to sell a different set of products?
And have you changed your sales model? I mean, is this more of a inside sales SaaS model that you're incorporating now for the sales accelerator product?
Actually, it's the opposite. It's more of we believe that it's more of a field touch-based model.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas the classic Brain Shark, we would sell from people primarily, they would do some traveling, but it would be from our offices here in Boston. We do believe that that if companies are going to make a bet with how do I improve my productivity, and it could be hundreds or thousands of my salespeople, and it's going to impact sales, which everybody has visibility to, that they want to feel really comfortable that you're doing this is somebody you can work with, and they want a company with experience, with credibility, with financial resources, with the abilities to be there for them over the long haul, and being with them and visiting them, we think is an important part of this.
Yeah, interesting. It sort of runs counter a lot of what's sort of happening in the SaaS model, SaaS world. So it's very fascinating to hear. I mean, I agree with you 100%. As you get into more complex sales and more decision makers, that makes sense. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, yeah, it's more of an enterprise sale,
Yeah.
and it doesn't mean that you can't sell this over the phone. It depends upon the company. I mean, if we're selling to a large multinational, um, some of those meetings will be face to face, but by the definition that people are all over the place, you're going to have conference calls and webcasts and web conferences and things like that.
Right.
But I think people want to feel you and touch it and know that there's a real business behind this. And I bet even at Salesforce, which is one of the classic SaaS businesses, they probably structure it the same way, whereas the small and mid-sized accounts might be more over the telephone. But when you get into the enterprise accounts, there's a lot of close relationships there.
Right. Well, good. Well, let's move into the last segment of the show. I've got some rapid fire questions for you. One word answers would be great, but you can elaborate if you want. And you ready to have a few of these?
Yeah, I think so.
Sure. Okay. So what's the one sales tool that you use every day for sales or sales management that you can't live without?
Actually, I love our own product called SlideShark. Awesome product, able present from your iPad or your iPhone, and it tracks all the data.
Great. Who's your sales role model?
You mean person
Yeah.
or?
Yeah.
Oh man, that would be my dad, who has deceased, and he was a pioneer in the helicopter business, and he took a concept that Igor Sikorsky built, and he built all the markets for it. He was the best salesperson I have ever experienced.
Great answer. So, what's the one book every salesperson should read?
Well, that's a tough question. I can, tell you about the most recent book I read, which was yours, Zero Time Selling, in the last couple of days.
I wasn't trying to solicit
Uh,
that.
No, no, no. I know you weren't, but it's top of mind. I just read it a few days ago. I thought it was a terrific, practical, easy to read book that, you can take away with half a dozen different things that I thought were spot on. So I'll give you credit on that one.
All right. Well, thank you. So, what's your favorite music to listen to psych yourself up for an important sales call?
Ha! So this this past summer, I've got four kids. Two are more on the creative side, the oldest, and then the two youngest are student athletes. We've been doing a lot of lacrosse tournaments
Mm-hmm.
this year, driving around East Coast. And SiriusXM has a channel called Road Trip, and it is awesome blend of all kinds of different stuff, and it is just kind of like super fired up music. So that's my answer on that one.
All right.
I love that stuff. I also like jazz too, but that doesn't fire you up so much.
All right. So last question. What's the first sales activity you do every day?
Huh. I look at our Salesforce dashboards. I get up and I do my email, but then I also look at the Salesforce dashboards. I want to know what's changing, what's going on, what's happening with our sales forecast.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you for joining me today, Joe. My guest has been Joe Gustafson, founder and CEO of Brainshark. And Joe, how can people find out more about Brainshark?
Go to our website, www.brainshark.com, brain and SHARK.
Sounds perfect. So remember, everybody who's listening, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you amp up your sales. And if you listen to the show today, I think we helped you with that. So until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.